think we should start the session because otherwise I'm going to be eating Susan's time. So if, let me go and push it. Buenos días. ¿Alguien vio a mi colega? Vamos a empezar, por favor. Let's start. Okay. Thank you, Susan. Okay. Our first speaker today is Susan Parker from CIDE, and she will talk about longitudinal surveys, how they are important for implementing quasi-experimental designs and experimental designs for policy evaluation. Okay, so Susan?
Buenos dias, good morning to everyone. So it's a pleasure to be here. I thank Alfonso for the invitation and a very nice organization and conference that we've been having. So I'm going to talk some today about program evaluation and what sorts of data that we need. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about what is program evaluation, what evaluation designs do we have, what data do we need. I need to give a little bit of background and then talk about the data requirements for program evaluation. I'm going to focus a lot on distinguishing experimental versus non-experimental designs, whether we replicate experimental estimates with non-experimental methods, what our data do we need for that, and I'll talk about program evaluation long-term programs. So I've been warned to speak very slowly. So I try to respect that. So first, forgive me for just presenting a few basic slides on what we do in program evaluation. I first just want to say, what do we mean by impact of program evaluation? It's about estimating impacts of social programs or any type of program. And when we estimate impact, so I promise, I think these are the only equations in the whole presentation. What we mean very specifically by impact is that what we would like to measure for people who participate in the program. We would like to measure impact, comparing what happens to them when they participate in the program versus what would happen to them if they didn't participate. So that's the kind of the mental exercise that we have in program evaluation. So in the equation, what we want to estimate is for those people who do participate, we want to estimate what their result would be under a world with treatment versus their result without a treatment. And so right away we come to the famous evaluation problem that we can't observe for people who participate in the program. We can't observe what would have happened to them if they hadn't participated, and we call that the counterfactual. So in terms of the equation, we don't observe y0 for those who participate. All right, so in the picture, what we have, so it's just models what I just said. So if the yellow line are people who participate in the program, and we observe them what they do before the program and after, but we don't know what would have happened to them without the program. So that's modeled by the blue line as counterfactual. And so it's very easy to estimate, to observe data for program participants under the program. So what we don't observe is what would happen to them if they didn't participate. So that's what we have to estimate. Counterfactual. That's really kind of the key in program evaluation. So how do we do that? So we do that by selecting a group which is not affected by the program, and we use them to measure, to estimate the counterfactual. So experimental evaluations, what they do is they use random assignment, usually eligible beneficiaries, and then randomly assigned to treatment and control versus non-experimental evaluations, which will argue that a particular group under certain conditions can replicate the counterfactual. Okay, so the kind of the main concern with estimation is avoiding selection bias. Selection bias is just that people who participate in programs are normally different from those who don't participate for many reasons. Programs are often only located in certain geographical areas. Many are means tested, so you have to qualify for low income or other conditions to satisfy to participate. And also participation is voluntary. When we, if we don't pick right control group or comparison group, then we can have selection bias. And so what that means is that our comparison group, in the absence of the program, is not very comparable to the treatment. That's what we have to worry about in choosing our method of evaluation. Okay, so let me now start moving towards talking about experimental designs and data. And so experimental designs, so where you randomly assign people to different groups to treatment and control. They have a long history in medical studies. They've also been used in developed countries, the US and Europe, to evaluate impacts of government programs like job training, and they've been used for decades there. And kind of experimental designs are really now kind of it seems like they're having they're sort of on everyone's minds and development. And what's happened during the last 20 years or so is very large growth in using experimental design for pilot interventions in the area of development and development, which is the settings are new, not so much the methods. And so now there's all these pilot interventions using experimental design to try and figure out what works, with the idea to potentially scale up larger programs that help promote development and developing or
y
poor
en
countries.
de desarrollo.
So we have the other great example in Mexico, Prospera, which was previously called Oportunidades,
que antes
which
se
was
llamaba
previously called
Oportunidades,
Progress, is an early example in this
en
literature.
esta literatura.
And then we also have the Poverty Action Lab, which has been promoting all these sort of small-scale interventions. A very famous one you might have heard about was in the news. It's an older study, but it's been in the news a lot recently. But great work. Ted Miguel, Michael Kramer, their piece on impacts of dewarming in Kenya. And the typical one there, the Progressa, the Prospera evaluation is a much larger evaluation. We call it a pilot. It's an early example of a program that was evaluated in experimental design and scaled up. And so, but the typical small-scale pilots that lots of people are doing that nowadays have small, they're small. 75 schools, this paper on works, which are allocated to treatment groups in the local area. Okay, so why do? To state the obvious, why do people like experimental design so much? And the reason is, when they're done well, and I'm going to skip a lot of the operational details. So if they're not done well, they have just as many problems as non-experimental designs. When they're done well, with a reasonable sample size, the idea is they provide a very good estimate of so a randomly assigned control group can tell us, gives a good estimate of the counterfactual, and so allows us to provide unbiased estimate. Okay, so here's just just a picture to distract from all the work. But just what random assignment would look like. I want to say about the picture. So what happens when you, what's the alternative to carrying out experiments, and there's lots of non-experimental methods for constructing the counterfactual that I'm just going to list here, and I'm not going to say too much about them. These non-experimental methods which try to construct a control group that would that's a good estimate of counterfactual. I'm going to put particular emphasis in the rest of the talk on the last, the before and after difference in difference methods. This is actually useful for all types of estimators. So there's difference in difference matching, estimators, regression, instrumental variables, and also they're used for experiments. So by difference in difference, I mean before and after for treatment.
Y diferencias de antes y después en los diferentes métodos.
Okay, so that's just a case of non-random assignment.
Este es el caso de la
control for
asignatura
whatever is
aleatoria.
making the treatment group look different than the control group before
diverso al grupo de control en el programa.
Okay, so what happens in these field experiments? Now I'm going to start talking about data. So, for evaluations, these small-scale type pilots, how does that work? How does the data collection work? So usually experiment doesn't last too long. So it's maybe a year or two, and the program may end. The researcher ran out of money to keep the program going, or sometimes the government can step in and sometimes for the model of Prospera, the control group becomes a treatment group, so you also lose your experimental design, not because the program ended, but because the control group also became a treatment. So lots of these small experiments are focused in a local geographic area, so saying small sample schools, and they're not usually nationally representative, but maybe in one or two states. Most of these experimental evaluations focus on short-term impacts. So the idea is you would have baseline data. So if your experiment's well done, you might say, well, why do you need it first? Well, you certainly need the baseline data to check whether your experiment is well done.
está bien
And of
hecho
course, it also
y
provides
obviamente
a
para
baseline for what the
proveer una
population
línea
looks like
básica de
before
cómo se ve
the
la
program
población
started.
antes de que iniciara el
Longitudinal
programa,
data,
la
one
información
or two
longitudinal
follow-up rounds, and
y
these
algunos
data tend to
seguimientos de
focus
esta
on
información tienden a
impact
enfocarse en el
indicators
impacto y los indicadores de
interest.
impacto de interés.
Okay, what are the advantages?
¿Cuáles son las
Let's talk a
ventajas
little about advantages and
de
disadvantages.
las
This is,
desventajas de estos
I'm going to resist that
experimentos?
temptation to talk for a very long time
Tengo la
about
tentación,
this,
podemos
but
hablar mucho tiempo
just
sobre esto,
mention,
pero solamente voy a
why are they
mencionar
so
por
popular
qué
and
son tan
the
populares
main potential advantage,
y
assuming they're well
cuáles son
done,
las ventajas
is what I
potenciales.
earlier said, giving a
Como
plausible
dije antes,
estimate
hay
of
una
the
estimación
counterfactual.
plausible del contrafacto.
Yeah, they do have an important
Y
disadvantage that Angus
también
Deaton,
hay
recent Nobel
importantes
Prize,
desventajas, por
is
ejemplo,
very vocal
que es
about
algo muy
voicing,
local,
and that their impacts are only
los
valid
impactos
for
solamente
the
son válidos
population
para la
they're
población
studied,
en estudio.
and said, the local example,
Por ejemplo, son
the impacts of
ejemplo local y los
Prospera program
impactos
in
del
rural
programa
Oaxaca.
Prospera
Tell us
solamente
anything
en
about
Oaxaca, no
impacts
es solamente sobre
in
los
Guadalajara,
impactos
and
en
it's not
Oaxaca,
clear they do.
y no es claro, pero
So in fact, Angus Deaton makes this criticism, and this is interesting when he, in terms of talking about the data, that he says, well, that these populations are so specialized that what you really want to know is what are the impacts on the overall population that's eligible. And so, he brings up this idea that you're better off using more nationally representative survey data that might be more subject to selection bias, so that have a larger, more representative sample that tells you more about program impacts than these small scale studies in very local areas. Okay, now that's a very that's a powerful, important idea. Whether you can kind of trade off a bit of selection bias with a more representative sample. And the question would be, how can we judge that? How can we measure that? That's a pretty tough question. But here's maybe a way of looking at it. And so here's a question. Can non-experimental evaluations replicate the results from experimental evaluations? Can they, and what data and methods exist for this? And so, if we just assume for a moment that experimental methods will give us the best approximation to true impacts, so under what conditions, with what data and methods can non-experimental evaluations replicate experimental evaluations? And so you might say, well, how? Since you can never observe the counterfactual, how could you possibly really have much of an idea? And the way that, the studies, the way that this has been looked at, and that you can look at it, is in settings where you have experimental design. You can see if you can try and replicate those impacts from the experimental impact. Try and replicate the non-experimental, so replicate the experimental impacts using non-experimental methods like matching. So Petra is a great expert in this area. She has a very famous paper on exactly this topic and matching estimators overall. I'm going to summarize some of the results because they speak exactly to this question and what sort of data that you need for carrying out non-experimental evaluation. So this is a very well-known, well-cited paper matching estimate econometric estimator, and exactly what one of the things that they do in this paper is look at what variables do you need to get a good estimate. A counterfactual is measured with to the experimental estimates, and what they find is that so there's different matching methods that you can use, but one of the important points of their paper, especially for this audience, is that the available data really affects how well you can do with replicating experimental design. So if you don't have very detailed data, if you just have a few control variables to try and control for differences between the treatment control group, then your biases will be a lot higher. So this implies you really need a set of detailed control variables, so not just age and gender, the usual set of control variables that can help you control for observable differences between treatment and control. And the other, some of the other implications of their work is that you need control and treatment groups in the same geographical area and the same type, same questionnaire, same survey instrument applied to both the treatment and comparison groups. So this starts to give us some indications of what we need for carrying out non-experimental evaluations. And another paper, and this is also very, very key, and this is another, I know kind of all the everyone's different topic. We're all saying, well, we need longitudinal data, and so I'm going to continue that and saying that we need longitudinal data, not only for experiments, but for non-experimental design. And Petra has another paper that shows that difference in difference non-experimental methods, in this case on matching. Again, they do a lot better than cross-sectional models in cases, overall generally, and also in cases where you don't have very good information. The difference in difference methods can really get you a lot. So you really need, by difference in difference, we need before and after information on treatment and comparison groups. So first conclusion, baseline data and hence longitudinal data following up of the program population is really critical. And as an aside, I'll just say it's it's pretty challenging both theoretically and just that level of convincing other people that your estimates are right. It's pretty hard to generate credible impacts with non-experimental evaluations when you only have active program data. So you really need this longitudinal dimension to be able to measure program impact. You need it for experimental evaluation as well, because you need to be able to justify or show that your experiment is well done. Okay, so conclusion, we need longitudinal data. So what can go wrong with experiments and data collection? A lot of things that can go wrong, but a pretty big one is selective attrition. And so, attrition is always a problem in longitudinal data. We've been hearing a lot about that in seminar. But it's kind of worse with program evaluation, because you don't just have the problem of overall attrition, but you have the problem of selective attrition. And so often programs affect the probability that you stay in the sample, that you can be found later on and interviewed. And so it's very common. It's really a big disaster in experiments. And it really implies when you have selective attrition that the program predicts who is interviewed, then you're really back in the non-experimental world of impact evaluation. And let me just say, even attrition, which is not selective, is a big problem in program evaluation because impacts will only reflect. So when you have a program, you want to estimate the impacts on the entire beneficiary population. But if you only manage to interview half of them, then your impact will only reflect those that you interviewed. And usually it's not random who leaves a sample, and it can be your impacts can end up being on those that are least affected by the program, or at least the least interesting population. I'll give an example from the evaluation of youth beneficiaries and the conditional cash transfer Prospera in rural areas. So this is a very famous, well-known evaluation, as I was mentioning earlier. So there was a randomly assigned treatment and control group at the beginning of the Prospera program back in 1997. And so this is a very famous evaluation. And Dr. Petra and I just wrote an article that's coming out in the Journal of Economic Literature summarizing all the short-term studies. There are over 100 looking at different effects of the program on education, health, expenditures, women's status, you name it. There's a million studies published in excellent economics and health journals. So, but one of the key questions of the Prospera program is not just the short-term impacts, which are important, but what happens in the long term. So, because this program has an objective of trying to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty. And so the idea is, kids get more education when they're young because of the conditional cash transfer. They have to go to school for their parents to get the money. So later on, do they get better jobs because of having more education? And that's a very interesting question. One of the initial motivations of a program like this that paid kids basically to go to school. And so, the experimental evaluation that was very successful in the first few years, later on had very high sample attrition. And so it's very hard to use evaluation to answer this question: what happens to the youth who got more education? Because the program, why is it difficult? Because when the program went back to interview them, they didn't do a very good job of following up. It's a very mobile population. Kids who are now in their early 20s, they don't live with their parents anymore. And so, this data that was captured after 10 years focused only really had youth who were still living in rural areas with their parents in their house. That's a very selected population. That's not a population that you think would have the most impacts of the program, right? Probably the population that benefits the most are those who migrate to urban areas. Anyway, that's just an anecdote, but brings up again the importance of all longitudinal data following up. So, with the perspective of program impacts, if you don't follow them up, then you have a very biased, a partial view of program impacts because you only know the impacts for those who you can influence. Okay, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to focus on longer term program impacts and talk about data requirements, although these are, we can also apply this to short term program impacts. This idea of what are the longer term impacts of programs, I would argue that's equal importance than the short term or initial impact evaluation. You need both. You need to know whether your program is working initially and whether these impacts that you might observe in the short term hold up over time. So there are at least two questions associated with longer term evaluation. So do initial program impacts hold up over time? So for instance, in the case again of Prospera, there was an increase in the growth of very small children relative to control children before age 2. And so that happened after a year after the program. But so do we know that that's a permanent effect? So that treatment kids are going to be taller always as a result of having participated in Prospera, or will the control kids have to? Because then they start receiving benefits as well. So that's an example of why we need to look at longer term impacts. And also maybe you're, in the short term, your interest is, okay, do more kids go to school? But in the long term, what you might be interested in is whether that leads to higher wages. And so you need a long-term impact for that to look at impacts on other variables. And even at an international level, it's surprising how few studies of long-term, those are the progressive kids protesting. It's not true that they're not going to have higher wages when they grow up, but okay. So there are really very few studies. It's amazing. Lots and lots of pilots of short-term impacts, but we have very few studies of long-term impacts. Almost none in Mexico. The ones that are related precisely to Prospera. It is a growing literature, and so now what I'd like to talk about is what data you need to carry out long-term evaluations. And here I'm going to give for each kind of type of data, I'm going to give an example, one or two empirical studies. Okay, so what are the alternatives for doing longer-term impact evaluations? And so for experimental evaluations, well, you can do a follow-up of original evaluation samples. You have the issues, as I was mentioning with attrition, you can have the issues for older populations of mortality. Here are a couple examples of studies where the programs were evaluating the short-term and longer term impacts were estimated. A paper with I have with Petra and Jerry looking at longer term impacts on education, trying to get at this issue of whether kids, not whether they have higher income, or whether they start to get better jobs because of the higher education of opportunities. We have this a follow-up of the worms paper. We followed up the kids who had received these anti-parasite medication, whether they have long-term impacts on child health investment. I'm going to mention a bit more detail. Long-term evaluation is a very famous one that's getting all sorts of sites in the media by Heckman and our colleagues from Chicago on the Perry preschool program. This is I was thinking when all these examples I've chosen are these amazing examples of 40 years of data, and maybe in Mexico we want to start a little bit lower our expectations that we're not tomorrow going to have 40 years of longitudinal data. But just to get an idea of what can be done. So the Perry preschool program targeted a very complete set of services provided to children in preschool, targeted very specific population, African American children with low IQs, and really one of the most disadvantaged population. It's amazing. It's very small. So 123 participants. They were randomly assigned in the 1960s. They've been continuously followed up since then. Attrition is low. It's only 11 that left the sample by age 40. And it's amazing. There are huge impacts on reduction and probability of being arrested, and being on welfare, and increases in earnings. And it's amazing. It's a very interesting program to study. And one asked me, this is. I hesitate a little bit about putting in the example because the sample size is very small. I don't want to give the impression that this sample size is always enough for doing a long-term evaluation. It's enough in this case because the impacts were so large. Sample size and doing power calculations is always a key component of program evaluation. Anyway, that's an example of a long-term impact using experimental design of treatment and control group participants who were followed up. Okay. What other alternatives? Not every program has an experimental design. And so here's an important question for designing longitudinal studies. So can longitudinal nationally representative data, can it be used to evaluate government programs? That seems, in a sense, less costly than doing a special survey every time you have a program that you want to evaluate. So can you use these large, multi-purpose, great data sets? For instance, we have these large programs in Mexico, Seguro Popular, Prospera. Do we have nationally representative data that can be used to evaluate that? Maybe the data wasn't designed with the idea or the only idea of evaluating these programs, but can they be used to do non-experimental evaluations? And in general, for large programs like Seguro Popular, Prospera, yes. And this is mainly because they both have sufficient observations of beneficiaries, in large part because the programs are big, so that there are a lot of observations in the data, and you have a longitudinal aspect. The part of the opposite of that for small programs, you probably won't have enough program participants, and even for large programs, it might be hard to do. This happens, for instance, I've been trying to evaluate longer-term impacts of Prospera using the MXFLS, and when I focus on rural areas, and then by gender and age, I start to not have enough observations. So that that can be a limitation. But one possible one recommendation for design of alternative longitudinal surveys, or if there's opportunities to increase the sample in existing longitudinal surveys like the MPAS and the MSFLS, is to oversample disadvantaged or poor populations. Now, it's very hard to predict what programs are going to come up in the future that you want to use the data for evaluation. No, but if you have an oversample of a disadvantaged or a poor population, that increases the likelihood that this more representative data can be used to evaluate future programs. Okay, so I'll just mention the evaluation, this non-experimental evaluation that we did with Rebecca Wong and Joe Science, evaluation of the Seguro Popular program in Mexico. Just the Seguro Popular, what is it? It's a health insurance program targeted for workers in informal sectors. So Mexico traditionally has had very low coverage of Social Security just because it's restricted only to workers in the formal sector, which is consistently been less than 50%. So this health insurance program, Seguro Popular, was introduced for the informal sector, and this started in 2002. So, we have the amazingly convenient baseline of MPAS that was carried out in 2001, provides a perfect baseline, for measuring how people were before the program started. And we have, lots of coverage in MPAS because it's a gigantic program. So by 2015, a program that just started more than about 10 years ago has more than 50 million people. So let's say about 40%. I said, so that's about 40% of the Mexican population. So that's huge. And so, so this is a great feature for program evaluation that the baseline turned out to be a baseline for Seguro Popular. We have 2,657 beneficiaries in the 2012 follow-up round of MPAS, and then we also combined it with administrative data on available health services, some heterogeneity impacts, on whether impacts are greater or smaller for when you have easier access to health services, and we use difference in different estimation methods. So this was an example where it was very easy to take existing longitudinal data and use it to evaluate an important large program. In Mexico, we were a bit lucky in terms of the baseline. The first round of the MPAS was exactly a baseline for the evaluation. Here, this is just showing kind of why it was such a good source. So this shows again with longitudinal data. So here we divide people into 4 groups. So those who didn't have health insurance in either round, those who had health insurance before but not after, vice versa. And so here, what you can see is, especially if you look at rural areas, so we have almost half of the population, 46.4%, who didn't have insurance pre-program, so in 2001 before the Seguro Popular, and now do. Okay, so this is really, it's a big intervention, and lots of people participate. So this is ideal. There are a lot of features that made this an ideal data source to use, and having difference before and after and a large population. Okay, here's another example of a long-term evaluation of Head Start. This is an early example of a long-term evaluation in the U.S. Study of long-term impacts of Head Start, which is an early childhood program for kids, using the NLSY. So very well-known longitudinal survey in the U.S., and it does have an oversample of the poor population, and their strategy was comparing siblings who participate with siblings who don't participate because they're too old when program started. And so why, this is, they're really able to carry out an impact, long-term impact estimation of the effects of Head Start using the NLSY because of this over sampling of the poor population. So that's really was key to being able to have enough samples, enough beneficiaries of your program to estimate
para estimar los impactos.
Okay. What's another alternative? What else can you do? And this is, really, I think it's a big growing area. And really, in Mexico, it'd be great to start doing more of this, linking administrative data to evaluation sample data. And again, I'm going to put an example that's an unbelievable example, but this work by Rush, Chetty, and co-authors on how your kindergarten classroom affects your earnings. So in later life, or you feel bad that my kids in kindergarten didn't learn anything. Terrible teachers. So their life is over. They're one. Or at least they didn't get this advantage that they could have gotten to get higher earnings because of having a good kindergarten teacher. Okay, so what did they do in this study? So this was a program called STAR, and what it did was it randomly assigned kindergarten kids to smaller, larger classrooms. And so, it was amazing. So that the kids who were assigned to higher quality classrooms, so with smaller classroom size and better teachers, they find all these impacts later on are more likely to attend college and save for retirement and live in better neighborhoods and all these effects of having a good teacher in small class in kindergarten. You might say, God, how could you do a study like this? It'd be incredibly expensive. You have to locate, follow up all these kindergartners, that you don't, in the beginning all you had was school records, what school they were in, and so the way that they did this study was they linked the kindergarten school records to tax records. So it's not that they followed up the kids, 30 years later to see where they were. They just used administrative records, basic tax records. How do they link using a social security number and date of birth, gender, and the name? So you have this amazing, data where you have kindergarten school records, the teacher that the child had in kindergarten linked to their earnings later on. So this is pretty amazing. So, but we do, I think there is starting to be more of these that using administrative data. So here's an example of using administrative data for evaluation of Seguro Popular in Mexico. And so, like I said, the Seguro Popular is only for workers in the informal sector. And so this has created a small literature on asking whether this is actually create incentives for workers to choose informal sector jobs over formal sector jobs. So there's a study of this. Raimundo was here yesterday. So he's one of the authors on this paper. I'm sorry that it's this awful yellow. I just, I had that yellow font to go away. I don't know why, but anyway. But so this is a paper that looks at, does the Seguro Popular make workers more likely to work in the informal sector as opposed to the formal sector? How do they study this question? And this is another great example of using nationally, this is this is an evaluation that focuses on one state. This is a national evaluation. They'll be using Social Security data. So the East has a lot of administrative data on the Social Security population, or wages, longitudinal data on wages, conditions, firms, tenure. And so, they merge that data with administrative data on the number of Seguro Popular beneficiaries to study this question. So this is a great example of using administrative data to carry out program impacts. Okay, so I'm going to conclude just with some tentative conclusions and possible suggestions for data summary. So, no way around it. Longitudinal data before and after is a must for getting credible program impacts, both for experimental and experimental methods. With respect to household level surveys, I want to push a little this idea of oversampling for populations, either within existing longitudinal surveys or for the future forthcoming longitudinal surveys, that's going to help increase the probability of having sufficient beneficiaries of disadvantaged populations of existing programs and new programs that will come up. Or why not wish list? Why not a longitudinal panel in Mexico focusing only on the poor population? I think that really, I mean, there's, I know all the, lived here a long time, I know all the defects, the CURP, nobody remembers, so the CURP is a kind of approximate to a social security number in Mexico. Everybody's supposed to have a CURP. Nobody remembers their CURP. It's a real problem, but here, we're starting to have a national numbers. I mean, I think there's really, we can start taking further steps of linking administrative data, tax returns, or other administrative data. EAMS has years and years of health clinics, results, and health outcomes that could be potentially linked to individuals. So I think real need to really start expanding in this area, linking administrative data to household data. I'll just mention the CURP can be looked up on the internet. I don't know if this is a violation of privacy. Anybody can look up somebody's CURP, just with their name, where they were born, and their place of birth. And finally, the issue of sample size. I haven't focused on that really in this talk, but that you got to do your power calculations, and it's worth investing in longitudinal data with extra observations. You need a usually fairly large sample size if you're pretty sure your program will have large impacts. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Gracias, Susan.
We have plenty of time.
Tenemos mucho tiempo para
Okay, so I will open
abrir
floor for questions.
la discusión.
Anyone?
¿Alguien?
Yeah.
Muy bien.
Thank you, Susan. Great presentation. I wanted to bring up one of your conclusions. Yesterday I mentioned that the move towards trying to create a longitudinal studies culture in Mexico, we would like to have in place some kind of ID that we can follow. And also an ID that we can link the administrative records with. So that would help us in following people, but also in the lineage. And then also I think we have to think of a culture in which the administrative records are shared, available, open to the researchers, because it's not the case right now. So you mentioned IMSS has years and years of Social Security records, but very few people have access to those, right? And so it's the same case for, COMSAR, the retirement records, that they have to come up with some culture in which they say these records have to be used with all the protective measures for confidentiality and so on. But there's got to be something in place, again, start the movement towards in that direction. It was just a comment. But yeah, I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. Yeah, I mean, one area, I don't know whether academic. Hello? Yeah. So, one mechanism which I don't know how much the academic community has used, and I haven't used it myself, embarrassingly, but there are these new transparency laws in Mexico where you're supposed to be able to get access to confidential data. So, I don't know almost any data really, so I don't know if that's an area that could be exploited more. So but I agree that it's a real problem. Often you get the data because maybe you knew somebody and it's not publicly available. I remember Ketty was here giving presenting his book about a year ago. And he was trying to get access. He wanted to kind of do the same replication for Mexico that he'd done for European countries, estimating inequality and concentration of wealth, and he wasn't able to get access to tax records from not possible. That's a real shame. That's the data not more available.
I have to say that also, I mean, in the same vein, education records, property, general direction in some places, in the Secretary of Education. So I think we need to move forward on that. Okay, another question? Yes.
I was wondering, Susan, if the key number from Progresa can be used, half of the poor population is in Progresa. So how these numbers have been used in the past, or how do you think they may be used?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, they do have administrative number. Yeah, I didn't put that on my slide. So, originally, I think the idea is, so Opportunist, this conditional cash transfer program, has about 15 million people, about, how many households is that? About 7 or 8 million. And so actually the idea was that would form kind of a registry for the poor population, because it seemed that you didn't need to interview that many more to have a pretty complete registry of the poor population. So and that they could use also for other programs. So in fact, Prospera beneficiaries are eligible for other programs automatically. So they definitely use the ID number for that. Again, I don't know how much that number can be linked to other data like tax records.
There is time for another one? Yes, Lisa.
Thanks. I just had a question on the experiment, the information, the data you showed about the NHAS, from the NHAS study with showing the expansion of the insurance over time. I wondered whether you had looked at the kind of any of the outcome data, outcome variables from the survey in terms of whether this has kind of improved people's health, having the access to the health insurance.
Oh, music to my ears, that question. So, how much longer do I have to talk about our paper? So, I'll just briefly answer. So, our paper impact studies, health impacts, because there are other studies, so the Seguro Popular, what they show is that there are impacts on reducing catastrophic expenditures and increasing utilization, and that's kind of what you expect from health insurance. And so we try to go a step further, looking at other health behaviors. So we look at preventative, so whether you're more likely to have a test for diabetes, hypertension, prostate. We also look at treatment. So if you have been diagnosed, now Mexico has a big problem with many other countries that lots of people are undiagnosed. They are diabetic, but they don't know, or they are hypertensive, don't know. But for the population that does know, so some of our results show that Seguro Popular increases the probability of being in treatment. Which, for a country with such a high level of diabetes and hypertension, those are encouraging results.
Yes, Hector.
I wonder if you have looked at differences between regions, say between the urban area and the rural area, and also geographical regions and at the state level, in coverage and, she said, in health outcomes and utilization regarding Seguro Popular.
The same study. So we looked at impacts by separately for rural and urban areas. So the impacts tend to be larger in rural areas, That's what you expect, because that's where the increases in the covered population with insurance are greater. Although we do find something interesting in rural areas where impacts are, so they're higher in rural areas, but then when we disaggregate rural areas into, because some rural areas in Mexico vary almost no health services available. So when we disaggregate into areas with kind of good health services versus not very many health services measured by number of doctors, we find that the impacts are greater in areas where they have better access to services. So that the impacts really work for a population that didn't have health insurance, and furthermore not that far away from health services. That's where it seems that there's a larger impact. And I'll just say, and this is more of a program evaluation issue. You know, one challenge for the Seguro Popular, it's introduced in context where there are other alternatives to health insurance. You know, it's not, you know, with or without health insurance. You know, there are other possible health insurances. There's Social Security, and so focusing on rural beneficiaries is, you know, kind of helpful because it's a population that has fewer opportunities for alternative health insurance. So it's easier to isolate the impact versus not having access to health insurance.
Yeah, so this is not like a question, it's more like a comment. No? So Susan mentioned the huge literature that there is about oportunidades. There's also a huge literature now about the Seguro Popular, and most of it is because there is a data to working on that. And there are tens of programs here in Mexico, no? In the Coneval has a list of all the programs, and we don't know much about most of them because we don't have the data. So if there were longitudinal studies, we could be doing much more about this.
Thank you very much, Carlos. That, you know, I was
we're like the drunk man, huh?
Yeah. So there's, I suppose you would say in the language of the economists, there is kind of endogeneity in terms of how much work has been done, how much data has been got, and things like that. Other question, please. Is that it? Okay, so.
Maybe just a comment on what you just said. For example, in the Colombian survey, we had reporting of social programs from the people that are surveyed, and they don't really know which are the programs that they are receiving, the names of the programs. So in fact, regarding the need for longitudinal surveys, I think it's very important to have IDs and to be able to connect with administrative data, and that way you'll do a good evaluation. So I think we need here in other countries, like the linkage of these two things in order to do good evaluation.
Yeah, that's also kind of very nice comment, because and I think in the talk of Susan, she was talking about, you know, the linkage kind of agenda. I think that's very important, but we don't really need to get access to those administrative records. Another question? That's it? Okay, so we're going to have a long break. Thanks to Susan. Please. Be present. Okay, so we are supposed to be back. Okay, maybe we should come back. Yeah. Shall we start at 10:30 so that we have a bit more time for the case studies? Okay, so 10:30, I will take the bell. Okay, thank you.
Que ya luego nunca les pregunté. Ajá.
¿Qué tal?
I mean, especially to keep people out of trouble, to get in some other issue. No, kidding. That was the argument in that movie with Antonio. Esperaba
Ya me pedí también porque estaba cansado, pero finalmente estaba buena.
No, está deliciosa. Me hubiera encantado. Es para el Aguascalientes.